probably one of the top complaints we received in our office in the primary was voters confused about how the system works, where do they get the notification, how do they request a ballot, where do they request a ballot. And when we went and looked at the code about what the code says and the law says about how this is supposed to work, it was gray, if not vague, not non-existent. And so this bill is really simple. It just lays out, clearly delineates the responsibilities of our office, of the county election officials, and the poll workers to educate and notify the voters about how crossover voting works. Ideally, there might be a bigger solution to actually how crossover voting operates, but that solution is probably more complicated because it depends upon national party rules and U.S. Supreme Court precedent. With that, I'll ask for your support for this important bill.
Thank you very much. And are there any witnesses, any additional witnesses in support? Please state your name, your position, and the organization you're representing, or who you're representing.
Good morning, my name is Jim Soper. I'm representing myself in this case. I support the bill. I would like to suggest that they provide this information to anybody who is eligible for a crossover ballot, not just those who are no party preference, but sometimes people can vote who belong to one party could have voted for the Democratic primary, and I think they need to be informed of their rights too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lee Lawrence with the League of Women Voters of California. We support this bill.
Thank you very much.
Richard Tam, speaking as an individual, I support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. And are there any witnesses in opposition? And I'd like to recognize former Senator Peace. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Dan Howell. I am the chairman of the board of directors of the Independent Voter Project. We're here to oppose this bill because we do not believe that further education is going to effectively address the issues of the voter confusion for no party preference voters. The California Constitution calls for an open presidential primary, and we began working with the Secretary of State's office in the middle of the year in 2015 on the issue of confusion for no party preference voters. We believe that the Secretary of State made a very respectful effort to educate voters, but the fact of the matter is that there was, as the Secretary of State's representative indicated, very serious voter confusion. We would like to work with the author and propose that in presidential primaries, the partisan primaries be preserved for the parties, but that no party preference voters receive a ballot that includes all of the presidential candidates, so that they have an equal opportunity to reflect their vote and indicate who their preference is for presidential candidates. Earlier today, the committee voted very strongly in favor of moving the presidential primary up to the Super Tuesday so that California would have a greater influence on the election process. I think if you want to really have an impact, you should also give independent voters in California the opportunity to show who their preferences are to the rest of the nation.
Mr. Chairman, it's always difficult to, particularly as former members, being in opposition on a measure we much prefer not to be. But with all due respect to the Secretary of State, members of the legislature, I think we've overcomplicated this. The state's constitution already requires an open primary for the presidential ballot. The federal constitution recognizes, we think quite correctly, the political party's right of private association. So why is it, in a measure that we authored, both the constitutional amendment as well as the statutory implementation, did we not provide for the difference between the nonpartisan open primaries, which we now use for legislative races, congressional races, and state offices, as well as U.S. Senate offices, versus the presidential primary? Very simple. I did not, as a former legislator, believe it was appropriate for, by initiative, that statutory construction to be done outside of this legislature. And the reason is that it needed to be guided very carefully from a legal perspective, because it has to meet both the federal constitutional test and the state constitutional test. The universal ballot described by Mr. Howe does that. It meets both California's constitutional requirement that the statute conduct a partisan open primary for president, as well as meets the federal constitutional requirement that the political party's right of private association not be violated. In addition to that, it'll save a very significant amount of money. You can expect it to be supported by county clerks up and down the state, and totally eliminates the voter confusion issue. So I oppose the measure, not because there's ever anything wrong with communicating with voters and improving information, but because it provides a cover, so to speak, for the continued inexplicable failure of this legislature to deal with a simple solution by following both the state's constitution and the federal constitution. And as a, if I can just make a, candid comment about what I think we all know is the elephant in the room, opposite thing, as a, $2,500 contributor to Hillary Clinton, the national party doesn't understand what's going on in California. And I know there's pressure behind the scenes in the national party not to accommodate this change. But as we saw in our Democratic Party primary, it is, in the long term, not good for Democrats, not good for either political party, and we ought to just get on with the business of embracing the ethic embedded in California's system, which is to make all decisions voter-centric, not party-centric. And once we do that, the parties will become stronger, more relevant, and the public confidence in our public institutions will improve.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Cody Pedersen. I speak as an individual. I'm also a member of the California Democratic Central Committee. I would like to register my opposition to AB 837 on the grounds that it is insufficient to bring state primary election law into conformity with Article 2, Section 5C of the California Constitution. I'd like to be clear, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I have never voted for a candidate that did not have a D after their name, and I likely never will. Furthermore, I do not believe in the effectiveness of third-party affiliation or in the wisdom or virtue of NPP registration. And this bill will therefore never directly apply to me. And honestly, if Bernie Sanders himself came down from the heavens on a Pegasus and commanded me to vote third party, I would refuse. Not because there's anything sacred about the Democratic Party or any other party, but because so long as our Constitution provides for winner-take-all elections, working within one of our two major parties, really just one, is the most effective way of promoting my progressive values. There's been some allusion to the progressive upsurge in activism within the party and within the state, and I represent, to a certain extent, that upsurge. I put together progressive slates throughout San Diego County, and I work daily with Bernie progressives throughout the state. And one of the things that's abundantly clear is our state's inability to adequately enfranchise NPP voters in the 2016 primary remains a sticking point for many, many individuals who would like to take an active part or who would potentially take an active part in democratic politics. I respect the Secretary of State's attempt here to clarify our labyrinthine rules with regard to NPP voting, but really the only solution is to actually change those rules, as the speakers who have spoken before me have suggested. So this bill will not adequately address the disenfranchisement that occurred in 2016. It will continue to discourage the participation of potential Democratic and incidentally Republican voters, and it will leave the state vulnerable to suit with regard to its inability to come into alignment with its own constitution. So I ask respectfully that the committee entertain a better bill that will actually lead to genuine open primaries as is stipulated in our Constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And are there any other witnesses in opposition? Oh, would you like to reply to? No? Then I'll open up the members for questions and comments. Councilmember Mullen.
Just need to make a brief comment and then run to another committee room, but I appreciate the work of the Independent Voter Project, and this is a real issue, this growing NPP group, used to be DTS, now NPP. So I think there's some merit there to this conversation and this argument. I do think it's really beyond the scope of this bill. I mean, this bill seems to me like it's dealing with the reality of our current situation and how do we properly educate all of these voters about their choices. So there's definitely a larger issue here that I think I'm certainly willing to engage on, and I bet the author would as well. But this is dealing with where we are right now in California, and I think it's overdue. I think we saw some confusion. We certainly saw confusion in this past election cycle about NPP voters' choices. So with that, I'm pleased to move the bill. Look forward to a larger conversation after the fact about how we can look at sort of this whole issue structurally, and I appreciate the points about our Constitution being brought forward. So thank you for that. I move the bill, and I will add on when I return.
Thank you, Councilmember Mullen. So we have a motion and a second. Any other comments or questions? No? So last year's presidential primary election was very confusing for many unaffiliated voters, including many that I spoke with personally going door to door in my district. This bill will improve education and outreach to these voters and ensure they are treated fairly across the state. I believe this bill is a step in the right direction, and for these reasons, I will be supporting this bill.